So, I'm really happy to have this talk with you today, Heli, because you have, in my view, one of the most interesting jobs one can have these days. You're appointed as Estonia's first ambassador at large for cybersecurity. And maybe you could just describe a little what is your role and position in cybersecurity?
Of course, all diplomats are dealing with the questions of peace and security. And my role is also to negotiate with other countries what kind of norms and confidence-building measures apply in cyberspace and how we can follow the international law, so to make sure that the cyberspace is not a Wild West, but we also have some rules and laws applying there. This is the first and most important role. And of course, we are quite savvy cyber nation, and one of my tasks is also to share the Estonian experience in this field.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you just said you have already made some serious experiences with cyber attacks, one has to say. In 2007, Estonia was the site of what is considered probably Russia's first sophisticated cyber assault. What happened there? What was the consequence for population, for the government, and what were the key learnings of this?
Yeah. I don't know how many of you might remember the events more than 10 years ago. But what happened in Estonia in 2007 was that Estonia relocated the Second World War monument, which happened to be the monument for the Red Army, to a military cemetery, and it spurred the protests, but not only the protests, but I think you are right saying that we were target of the first sophisticated hybrid campaign, where cyber attacks were one element. And the cyber attacks lasted for 3 weeks. Our experts were mitigating the cyber attacks so that all the online services, especially our banking sector, which was already then based on online services, so that all these services could be available. And thanks to the very strong mitigation effort, Estonia kept functioning, and the worst was prevented. But of course, we learned the lesson, and the lesson is that in cyberspace, you are having the new domain of activities for all the actors, and you have to make sure that you are prepared when this kind of cyber hybrid campaign or cyber attacks or cyber operations are targeted at you.
Mm-hmm. And you did something that's called, I think, the Tallinn Manual. What is
this is related to the notion that international law should apply in cyberspace. And Tallinn Manual is a bit academic analysis how we can apply international law in cyberspace. So it gives some ideas for those governments who haven't studied yet how the international law applies in cyberspace, how we can do it. And there are two parts of Tallinn Manual. There is Tallinn Manual 1, which is describing how the state actors should act during the war in cyberspace. And the Tallinn Manual 2 is discussing what the state actors can do and cannot do below the threshold of armed conflicts. But of course, all the countries have to articulate their own views, what are actually the how we should apply international law in cyberspace, and the Tallinn Manual is encouraging to do that.
Okay, and can you say something about what countries are in line with your views on this, for example?
I think all the liberal Western democracies are of view that international law, as we have it right now, all the principles what we have it right now, that we should not attack the civilian targets. Attacks should be proportionate, and all the old good principles should apply also in cyberspace. But of course, there are other countries who might think that it's not useful to have law in cyberspace, and they are opposing international law being applied in cyberspace, and these tend to be more authoritarian countries. So.
Achieving cyber resilience is really one of the top priorities formulated in the cyber strategy of the European Union already also years ago. Do you think we really have made, we have achieved something in that field already? So, and what are the, what have we achieved since that strategy yet?
I think the European Union has quite a good policy posture, if I may say so, right now on cyber. Because in 2013, the first strategy was calling for resilience. Already by that time, we have harmonized cybercrime legislation in all 28 member states. After the 2013 strategy, we have adopted the Network and Information Systems Directive, NIS Directive, which was supposed to be transposed to all member states' legislations by 2018. Then in 2017, there was a top-up of the 2013 strategy, and there was a new Cybersecurity Act in 2017, which is then putting more emphasis on certification frameworks and also cooperation between the member states, and is also diverting more investment into cybersecurity by the European Union. I think all the important policy elements are there, and now the question is how the member states are able to implement those.
Yeah, that's indeed an interesting question.
Yes.
We discussed quite a lot on the Cybersecurity Act and how this will turn out in practice in the end. Yeah. So what maybe as you have definitely thought a lot about that issue of cybersecurity in Estonia, what could the other European countries maybe learn from your approaches? And
I think our approach is to also exercise collaboration and cooperation between different parts of the government, and also between the government and the private sector. Because as the cyber reality is that majority of the infrastructure is in private hands. All the critical infrastructure, energy, banking, telecommunications, it is usually private sector that provides these services. So if there will be the major cyber crisis or cyber operation, it's usually the same critical infrastructure that might get those attacks, and therefore one has to have a system in place how you are exercising between the public and private sector.
How does that work? Are there, for example, any reporting obligations on the sides of the industry when attacks happen that they have to report also to the state authorities, or the other way around?
The reporting is something which is a prevention, part of the prevention. That I think there is a reporting obligation in NIS directive, yes, and each country has solved it a bit differently how to do the reporting, because the NIS directive is not prescribing how exactly to do it. In a way, I think it's a good measure to make sure that you have this kind of public-private partnership in your country, but I think the cooperation has to go further than just reporting.
So I think on this conference, cyber is quite a little bit exotic. We talk about AI all the time these days, and other new technologies. So, but of course, AI also might play an important role in cybersecurity. What is your role, your view on that? What role does AI play for cybersecurity?
Of course, AI could be used, or machine learning, as I think it is right now, could be used for cybersecurity, or it could be used to protect the critical services and so on. But at the same time, we already know that AI can be also used differently. There is a case that I heard from my colleagues in the cybersecurity industry, that they have heard about the the cybercriminal case, how the $10 million transfer was made because the chief financial officer got a phone call from CEO who said, you have to do this transfer now. But later on, it turned out that this kind of phone call actually didn't take place, but there was a cybercriminal group that had used AI to mimic the voice of the CEO. So you see that we will have two sides of the AI. We have the positive side, and then we also will see a lot of misuse of AI, because the humans will use it eventually.
So again, we have a powerful tool that can be used for cybersecurity and against it. So it will probably...
So the security of AI will be just the next question.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting question. How secure are the systems that we use today? I hear different things from the expert. What is your opinion about autonomous weapon systems? Because we also discussed this a lot here. Do we need a ban on autonomous weapons?
Yeah. Well, the international humanitarian law is saying quite directly that if there is a weapon with the lethal aim, it has to be controlled by humans. So the producers of the weapons should take into account this legal predicament. And I think there is already the working group in the UN now, which is discussing the autonomous lethal weapons and the use of AI. So.
Do you think they will be successful in agreeing throughout the UN members?
They should be, yeah.
They should be. But will they?
Well, we will see how these discussions will develop.
But you seem quite positive.
But of course, I think we are not seeing many of the new developments of technology or how that might impact our interactions yet now. But possibly some sort of safeguards should be put in place before it's too late.
Yes, I think some would certainly agree. If you don't do it on weapons, then it'll probably be hard to argue whereabouts instead of there we should put some limits.
I think it's just to complicate your life even more, just to say what is possible. If we will have too many refrigerators which are connected to the internet with no password or weak password, then at one point we will have the army of the refrigerators attacking the other countries. Because you can put together the very good botnet of all these civilian appliances and use this data bandwidth to attack somebody.
So in these days, NATO is celebrating its 70th anniversary, and so maybe you can also talk a little about what can the alliance do to defend its member states in the field of cybersecurity.
Yeah. NATO has done many efforts. By now it has several policies in place, and NATO has declared cyberspace a domain of operations. So the NATO military is now preparing all the doctrines and the policy papers in order to understand how cyber domain is helping the military or how they can protect themselves better in cyberspace. NATO also is discussing something that the EU already had discussed a bit earlier, which is the response to cyber operations below the threshold of armed conflicts. The problem with cybersecurity is that the majority of the cyber attacks what we have seen so far are happening below the threshold of armed conflicts. And the question is how we can respond to this. Because we do not have good clear-cut response option, but we have a menu or toolbox of different responses. And the EU put together its toolbox in 2017. And this toolbox will have declarations, statements, collective attribution statements, for instance, were done last year. Also the sanctions, economic sanctions, is something that the EU has. And now NATO is doing something similar on the NATO side. I think this is quite important. And also there is, of course, the NATO cyber defense exercise, which helps the all the NATO nations to prepare for cyber attacks. It's held each year in Estonia, and there are several other steps what NATO is doing.
Is that only cyber? How you do?
It's a cyber exercise called Cyber Coalition.
Or also combined with an army?
It's also combined with the crisis management exercise. NATO is exercising all the time. So there is a specific cyber exercise, and there is an exercise on cyber, but part of the overall crisis management exercise. Right. And also the NATO Center in Estonia is organizing the multinational technical cyber exercise, which is called Locked Shields. For instance, right now, there is a multinational cyber exercise happening, which is in Estonia, but it's built in a way that different nations from all parts of the world can take part of it. And altogether, more than 1,000 people take part of it.
All right, that's impressive.
For instance, Brazil is taking part of it, Japan is taking part of it, US, it's not only NATO, it's the whole larger group of countries.
So would you say that cooperation between NATO and the EU is going quite well on developing these tools and exercises?
There is a EU-NATO cooperation on information sharing, also on exercises, on concepts, and crisis management. Yeah.
Okay. And in which fields do you think we need maybe an even stronger cooperation?
Between us, the countries. I think there's some sort of cyber resilience exercising and having the clarity if there is a crisis, who does what between the countries, but also within the countries. So this is helpful.
How can we streamline that? Is that?
I think it's, of course, if it's on a national level, then each country has to solve its own way to do it. But on a multinational level, I think the NATO framework is quite helpful, but also the EU framework is helpful. So the more you see that the cyber issues are growing very fast, so there is a cyber crime community, there is a cyber resilience community, and there is a cyber defense community. And cooperation between those communities is also very important. So.
Yeah, I guess the exchange there is helpful to improve processes, as is most of the time, really. So if you sum it up, what are your three top priorities for your work as an ambassador for cybersecurity?
What we have this year is that we will start discussing the cyber norms and confidence building measures at the United Nations level again, and the issue of international law and how we apply international law. And I think this is the first task for all diplomats. And I just learned yesterday that I will be part of one of those UN groups also this year and next year, and so I'll continue this work. Secondly, which is important for Estonia, because somehow we are the destination of many exploration groups that are coming to Estonia and asking advice how to do cyber. So for us, it's also important to share our experience and export our experience. So we are looking for increasing the capacity building in those nations in developing and emerging world, which maybe are not yet so cyber savvy. And of course, we are also strengthening the cooperation frameworks within the EU and NATO, because I think it's important to have our own democratic countries to be better prepared.
And do you have any advice for Germany, maybe? What could we learn?
I think I already have repeated that there is the importance of coordination and cooperation between the different cyber communities inside of your country. And maybe this is the first, and then the public-private.
Maybe there's room for improvement there.
And then the public-private partnership is important. It's generic.
That's actually an
everywhere.
Interesting point, because I think we can still get more exchange between the public and the private side, and also on the expert side, make it easier to work both sides in turns, maybe.
I think we can say this about every country in the world, and I can also say it about Estonia, that we still can improve our own cooperation, although I think as a small country we already have it. But
yeah, yeah. So would you, from your point of view, from your experience with your position, would you tell other countries to also install a similar position to yours? Is that helpful?
If the country has ambitions to also have discussions on international level, yes, certainly.
Yeah. So, I think so. I'm a little bit confused and would like to ask to get directions on the time, because I thought it was running a little late, so I'm not sure whether we can still talk, or we can talk for further. All right. Good. So we have actually 4 more minutes. Yeah, maybe to come back on the AI side once more, I'd like to know, are there any examples what you're currently working on, how to use AI to improve cybersecurity in Estonia?
There are some machine learning methods already in place to detect anomalies in the network, yes, and some others. So the AI is an interesting topic, which is just a bit of catchphrase. But as we understand, there is no generic AI yet, but there is a specific AI, which means that this specific machine learning tool can help this specific thing. But once we grow further with AI and there will be the generic AI, then we have to start thinking what this AI is going to do. And you might know that the European Union is putting together now the communication on the human-centric AI, and has produced several principles how the AI should be developed in a way that it helps the future processes, and we are not creating something that we don't know what to do with in the future, because we already have the examples how the AI is aggregating big data. I think there was an example of AI being used in home loans in the US, and it aggregated the big data in a way that it started segregate people in different parts of the town. So this is what also AI might do, because if you do not program it properly, then you don't know what it does in the end. So I think these kind of examples are there that humans don't know yet how to do AI properly.
And I've got that's maybe a little unfair, because it's not on cybersecurity, but because we discuss it so many times, data protection and privacy, and it's sometimes, well, we definitely need security to enable data protection. But on the other hand, sometimes we also have conflicts between our goals in reaching perfect or nearest perfect cybersecurity, and on the other hand, the data protection rules. How is the view in Estonia on that? Are there also big data protection discussions going on, or?
Usually, I think the data protection rules are helping cybersecurity, because those companies who did not have any security measures in place, then with the data protection framework, they had to do it, because otherwise they would face the fine. So in a way, I would see it's a bit more win-win than a conflicting requirement. Of course, for some larger companies, there are many requirements now. There is a data protection reporting requirement, and there is a cybersecurity reporting requirement. It's just that the number of requirements has increased, but as for Estonia, I think we do not see the data protection as a hindering problem. It's rather that mostly, I think, all the companies who had to then change.
So it actually supports then
supporting
cybersecurity.
Because the cybersecurity rules are so strict anyway in Estonia. There was a huge virus called NotPetya. You might have heard about it. And for instance, Estonia was not hit by this.
Because
Estonian organization
was so up to date, they didn't.
Estonian organizations had updated their systems and had done the prevention work.
So we see it's quite wise to invest a little in cybersecurity and also, of course, data protection. And with these wise words, we already are at the end of our little talk. I thank you very much for coming. It was really interesting to hear how you handle these issues. And so thank you for coming.
Thank you.